General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Wednesday, April 23, 2025. First, Carly walked into the hospital with a slow-burning fury rising inside her. She couldn't believe that something as critical as Sunny's heart surgery was happening behind her back, and the first person she suspected was Jason, the one man who had always stood by her through everything. Sunny's quiet departure to Los Angeles wasn't just a shock, it felt like a silent declaration that she no longer belonged in his inner circle. Carly felt deeply betrayed, as if all the loyalty and devotion she had poured out was no longer valued or returned. Jason stood in the hallway, his face unreadable, but a storm churned quietly beneath his calm exterior. When Carly confronted him with fiery accusations, Jason insisted he had no knowledge of Sunny's decision. He wasn't lying, but Carly's eyes cut through him like blades, holding him accountable for something even he couldn't control. Jason understood Carly. He knew she felt abandoned, not just by Sunny, but now by him too. Even though he had no intention of shutting her out, her emotions were too raw for logic or explanation to reach her. Their argument exploded in the middle of the hospital, loud and public, where anyone nearby could hear the bitterness in their voices. Carly accused Jason of shutting her out, of choosing silence over protecting her from the pain of being excluded. To her, his silence equaled complicity. Jason didn't respond with anger, but his calm words only intensified her frustration. They lacked what she needed most, a deep understanding and an honest apology. The distance between them, though left unsaid, was growing into something unbridgeable. Even amidst the emotional chaos, Carly couldn't shake her worry about Sunny. She had watched him face countless enemies before, but a heart surgery, with death lurking on the edge, made her feel more helpless than ever. The fact that she couldn't be by his side only deepened her torment. Jason, though at odds with Carly, shared the same concern for Sunny, but he masked it in his usual quiet resolve. He believed the best way to protect Sunny was by keeping things under control, even if it meant losing Carly's trust in the process. Both of them carried the weight of their shared past, the battles they'd fought together, the moments they'd saved each other, but now, they were locked in a fight neither of them had wanted. Carly felt abandoned, and Jason felt trapped in a position where he could no longer be what both Sunny and Carly needed him to be. At the very moment Sunny needed them the most, they found themselves pulled apart, not by an enemy, but by their own unresolved pain. They both wanted to protect him, just in completely different ways, and that difference had driven them into a head-on collision. The tension between Carly and Jason didn't end with one argument. It lingered like a deep crack growing silently across a once solid foundation. This wasn't just about a lack of information, it was a collision of two wounded hearts, each feeling left behind. Carly yearned to still be part of Sunny's life the way she once was, while Jason was torn between loyalty and harsh reality. As the hospital lights continued to glow in the cold corridor, neither of them realized that this fracture might not just be a passing wound, it might be the permanent break in a bond they had once believed unbreakable. Second, Dante and Lulu sat across from each other in the familiar living room, a space filled with memories of a family that once felt whole. Lulu's eyes were heavy with sorrow as she revealed what she had recently discovered, a truth buried for years, now rising to the surface with unsettling intensity. She told Dante about the child Brooke Lynn had once carried, the one everyone believed had gone missing under unclear circumstances. But what shocked her even more was the possibility that the baby might not have simply disappeared. According to Lulu's findings, the child may have been switched at birth and lost somewhere out there, without even Brooke Lynn knowing the truth. The thought was heartbreaking. No one wanted to believe it, but the evidence Lulu had uncovered wasn't easy to dismiss. Brooke Lynn had endured months of pain believing she had lost her child, but perhaps the reality was even more cruel. Her baby was stolen before she ever had the chance to hold them. Lulu admitted that she wasn't sure whether Brooke Lynn had ever suspected the truth or if she'd been living all this time in the shadows of a carefully hidden lie. Dante sat frozen as Lulu spoke, a wave of helplessness washing over him like a chill that seeped through his bones. As a father, he understood the deep, unconditional love one has for their child. And he couldn't begin to imagine how someone could commit such a heartless act, tearing a mother away from her newborn. What crushed him more than anything was the thought of that child, now likely growing up somewhere without any idea of who they truly were, unaware that their biological parents had never stopped searching or longing for the chance to reunite. Lulu, her face marked with worry, went on to explain that it seemed unlikely the situation had happened by accident. A baby doesn't get switched without intent. This was a plan, a scheme crafted by someone with cold calculation. That meant there were still secrets buried beneath the surface, truths that could change lives the moment they were revealed. In that moment, nothing else existed except for the quiet tension that enveloped the two people who had once shared a home and a future. Dante and Lulu both knew that if her suspicions were right, they were about to embark on a difficult and emotional journey to reclaim what had been lost, not just the identity of a child, but justice for a mother who had been robbed of the most sacred bond life could offer. As silence settled around them, Lulu's gaze drifted to the window, as if searching for a flicker of hope in the darkness that had fallen outside. There were still too many unanswered questions, but one thing was certain: they had to uncover the truth. Somewhere out there, a child might be living a life that wasn't theirs, and a mother was still waiting for a miracle that would bring her baby back into her arms for the very first time. Third, Drew's reaction completely took Willow by surprise, so much so that she had to pause and wonder if she had misjudged him all along. In the past, there had been a certain level of trust between them. There was even a time when Drew was the only person Willow felt she could truly rely on. When she decided to sign the guardianship papers, officially granting Drew legal authority over her children should anything happen to her or Michael, it wasn't just a formal decision, it was a gesture of deep trust. But instead of drawing them closer, that decision seemed to mark the beginning of a growing distance between them. Lately, Drew's behavior had become strangely cold. He no longer initiated conversations or checked in with her like he used to, and the natural warmth in his tone whenever they discussed the children had all but vanished. Willow could feel a subtle, unmistakable shift in his demeanor, one filled with hesitation and emotional distance. At first, she considered the possibility that Drew was simply overwhelmed with work or personal stress. But those explanations quickly fell apart each time she saw the detached look in his eyes. That's when her thoughts began to turn toward Nina, a woman capable of poisoning even the strongest bonds with just a few carefully chosen words. Willow started to suspect that Nina may have said something to Drew, perhaps a warning, perhaps a distorted version of the truth about her and Michael. Drew was someone who fiercely protected those he cared about, and if he believed that Willow was hiding something or manipulating the situation behind his back, then his cold reaction would make painful sense. What unsettled Willow more than anything was that Drew didn't confront her or ask questions, he simply withdrew, letting silence do the damage that words couldn't. While her relationship with Drew was quietly unraveling, Willow was preparing for a trip to Germany to visit her husband, Michael, who had been living abroad for personal reasons. To Willow, this wasn't just a family visit. It was a chance to reconnect with her husband and escape the emotional weight pressing down on her in Port Charles. But that very decision seemed to ignite something in Drew. He never voiced it directly, but the frustration in his expression and the barely concealed tension in his tone whenever Michael's name came up said more than words ever could. It was as if Drew, humiliated and quietly seething, saw this trip as a betrayal. Willow knew the situation was spiraling out of her control. On one hand, she had to maintain her role as a mother and wife, safeguarding the stability of her family. On the other, she couldn't allow the growing misunderstandings and silent accusations between her and Drew to go unaddressed. She didn't want to lose the support he once offered so selflessly, but she also couldn't compromise her own loyalty just to ease the discomfort he was feeling. Deep down, Willow understood that the time had come for an honest, direct conversation. Before the damage became permanent. Fourth, instead of allowing herself to be cornered by slander and political attacks, Laura made a decisive choice. She stood up and faced her adversaries with the unwavering resolve of someone who had weathered far worse storms. The accusations hurled at her by Drew and Ezra weren't just casual political jabs, they were calculated, malicious strikes aimed at dismantling her reputation and removing her from office. They claimed she had knowingly covered up Sonny's illegal operations, suggesting that her ties to him weren't just personal, but complicit. It was a narrative drenched in manipulation, designed to erode public trust and cast her leadership in a criminal light. But Laura wasn't the kind of woman to crumble under pressure, especially when she knew the truth was on her side. What infuriated Laura more than anything was the twisted nature of their claims. Her relationship with Sonny had always been complicated, yes, but it was rooted in history, community, and nuanced loyalty, not corruption. To take that bond and warp it into evidence of collusion was not only dishonest, it was cruel. Drew, who once stood beside her as an ally, had now joined forces with Ezra, a man whose hunger for control knew no ethical bounds. Together, they stirred up a campaign of whispers and headlines, planting seeds of doubt among city officials and the public. Their aim was clear: force Laura into resignation or public disgrace. But they had underestimated how fiercely she would fight to protect not only her own integrity but the very ideals her office was built upon. The stakes were higher than ever. The media had already begun to latch onto the controversy, with opinion pieces and anonymous sources feeding a narrative that Laura was compromised. Council members who once backed her started to tread carefully, unsure whether supporting her would drag them down too. It was a textbook takedown strategy, one she had seen used against others before, but never thought would be used against her. And as the walls began to close in, Laura realized she needed more than just truth on her side. She needed strategy, and most importantly, she needed allies who still believed in her. That's when she turned to Jordan, someone she trusted not just as a law enforcement professional, but as a friend who knew the battlefield of power and betrayal all too well. Together, Laura and Jordan began to carefully construct a counteroffensive. They combed through records, reviewed legal frameworks, and tracked down inconsistencies in Drew and Ezra's own dealings. What they found gave them a glimmer of hope. Links between Ezra and certain business interests that had been benefiting from under-the-table deals, possibly laundering money through city contracts. Laura knew she couldn't go public just yet. They had to build a solid case, piece by piece, so that when the moment came, there would be no denying the truth. This wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about reclaiming her narrative, and showing Port Charles that she was still the strong, principled leader they had elected. As the days passed, Laura walked a tightrope of diplomacy and resistance. In public meetings, she remained composed and articulate, never giving Drew and Ezra the satisfaction of watching her unravel. But behind closed doors, she worked tirelessly, meeting with advisors, gathering testimonies, coordinating with legal counsel, and quietly rallying support among those who hadn't turned their backs. She knew that the enemy wasn't just Drew and Ezra. It was fear, complacency, and the poisonous idea that integrity couldn't survive in politics. But Laura refused to be a casualty of that cynicism. She had always believed in fighting the good fight, and this time would be no different. Eventually, the tension began to shift. Whispers of investigation into Ezra's financial ties started to circulate. Journalists who had once chased scandal now smelled a new story, one of political manipulation and hidden agendas. Laura, once cast as the villain in their narrative, was now slowly being reframed as the target of a smear campaign. Her composed but firm stance in the face of adversity became a talking point on its own, and allies who had hesitated before began to reach out again, offering quiet support and pledging loyalty. Still, Laura knew this war was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. Laura's ultimate goal wasn't vengeance, but justice. She didn't want to destroy Drew and Ezra simply for their betrayal. She wanted to expose the system that allowed men like them to operate with impunity. She wanted to show the citizens of Port Charles that leadership wasn't about control, but about courage and character. If that meant going to war in the political arena, then so be it. She had fought for her city before, and she would do it again. Drew and Ezra thought they could silence her, discredit her, and humiliate her. What they didn't realize was that Laura wasn't a symbol they could tear down. She was a force. And this time, she would make sure they walked away with the bitter taste of defeat carved deep into their legacy. Finally, Tracy no longer maintained a vague or evasive attitude. She walked straight into the Quartermain mansion's living room with a stern expression and a firm tone in her voice, immediately shifting the atmosphere into tense silence. Without beating around the bush, Tracy made a proposal that was, in essence, an ultimatum. She wanted Sasha to leave the Quartermain household. This wasn't a gentle suggestion or a polite recommendation, it was a directive, cloaked in the language of what's best for everyone. The reason Tracy offered was that Sasha's presence was disrupting the family balance, implying that she no longer belonged in the current, sensitive family dynamic. But beneath that seemingly logical explanation lay deeper motivations, perhaps distrust, prejudice, or simply Tracy's ever-present desire to maintain complete control over the Quartermain estate. To Tracy, the house wasn't just a residence, it was a symbol of legacy, authority, and dominance. And in her eyes, Sasha, despite once being family, despite all she had endured, remained an element outside the structure Tracy wanted to preserve. Sasha was stunned by the proposal. She hadn't expected Tracy to be so cold, especially after everything she had been through. The loss of Brando, her psychological trauma, and the painful journey of rebuilding her life. Although she no longer had an official tie to the Quartermains, she had come to feel that this home was one of the few places where she still belonged. But now, faced with Tracy's harsh directive, she had to confront the painful truth that perhaps she had never truly been welcomed at all. Tracy, calm and unreadable as ever, showed no remorse or hesitation. She claimed her actions were in the name of family stability, but in reality, it was another calculated move to eliminate any perceived threats to the carefully controlled power dynamic she upheld. To Tracy, emotions never outweighed the need for control. And in the vision she had for the Quartermain family's future, Sasha simply no longer fit. Though heartbroken, Sasha knew she couldn't beg or ask for pity. Her dignity meant more than any roof over her head, even one as grand as the Quartermain mansion. So, with her heart heavy and her mind full of unresolved emotions, she made the decision to leave, with her head held high. Because even if she was being pushed out of a place once called home, Sasha understood that she could build a new life on her own, one that didn't depend on anyone's approval or permission.